Right, it is a few minutes past 7 a.m. and it is World Freedom Day. And here in Nairobi, we're in the third hour of your unrivaled television morning show. Morning Express is now bigger and better, coming to you from 5 a.m. every weekday. And this hour, it is time for our newsroom conversation. Michael will be driving that conversation. But before that, a reminder of our question of the day. We're asking you, is the timing on the probe of the Kalonzo Musyoka Foundation suspect? Is the timing of the probe on the Kalonzo Musyoka Foundation suspect? Do engage us. Some of your thoughts already coming in. And we have Jay here. Saying that let's not always try to defend politicians, even in their illegalities. Let Kalonzo be investigated and truth come out. It is just the law. Do keep your comments coming in. We'll be sampling them as we move forward. But time now for our newsroom conversation. Michael?
Thank you very much, Michelle. And yes, like you've just mentioned, today is World Media Freedom Day. And well, on set today, we have representatives from different parts of the world that are going to be participating in the newsroom today. This is also where we have the Nairobi Satire Festival. And of course, we're going to be giving you a background of what that is all about. And also the role of satire when it comes to politics and media and how they're able to communicate. And especially now that we have very good examples. For instance, we have Donald Trump, who media somehow doesn't know how to handle him, especially because he has a way of going off what we'd call traditional ways of communicating. But satire seems to be able to get the message across, albeit in a different manner. So that's what we're going to be looking at. But let me introduce the panel that we have here this morning. And I'd like to start with the lady. Just cultured that way, ladies first. So I'll start with Agnes Nandutu, who is from Uganda. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
All right. To my immediate left, I have none other than Tongai Makara from Zimbabwe. Good to have you. Let me see if I can remember. Makadi. Good. So not doing badly. Then we also have Isam Urikat from Jordan. Yes, unfortunately, I cannot speak a single word of Jordanian, so I'll just stick with good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Last but not least, we have Patrick Gadara, who's a familiar face right here. Patrick, good to have you.
Good to be here.
All right. So now let's start with the Nairobi Satire Festival. And maybe, Gadara, you can just give us a background of what that is all about and why it's even important and why it's in Nairobi.
Okay, the Nairobi Satire Festival is simply a collection of satirists from across the world to discuss what the issues are for satirists, comedians, cartoonists, people who comment on the news using the medium of comedy, to discuss what are the issues that they might be facing in the way, given that the world has changed, or you've got, as you mentioned, people like Trump, people like Marine Le Pen in France, and stuff. And the question is, how do you cover them as it is? And for Kenya specifically, as we are going into the elections, how would satirists essentially cover this election using their medium? And I think for us, we've just thought it would be best to get these people together to discuss what those challenges are, to learn from one another, to see what are the examples, what's the experience from other parts of the world, and how would it impact, or what can we learn from them, so that as we go into our elections, how can we do a better job of covering them?
All right. Let me come to you, Tongai. And Zimbabwe is a country that, of course, from other countries, we have an impression that may be correct, may be wrong, based on what we read on the newspapers. And it's one, especially today being World Media Freedom Day. Is Zimbabwe a country where you're able to express yourself, especially when it comes to politics, freely, in an environment that is free?
We actually have a saying in Zimbabwe that there is freedom of expression, but you're not guaranteed freedom after expression.
Wow.
So it's a very delicate situation to navigate, especially when we're at a time where we're gearing towards elections. Mm-hmm. You find that the media space tends to shrink in terms of media freedoms or access, people's access to media. So it's a very difficult space to navigate. And that's where we find avenues such as satire being a creative way to inform the public that is somewhat in a state of apathy when it comes to engagement with media, which we also sometimes see as being very polarized, as either being pro-government or independent to the state that it isn't as trustworthy as the common citizen would like it to be. So that's where the space where satire takes up and takes politicians and the common man to task with regards to some of the ridiculousness that we see in society.
And now, based on what you're saying, are you able to almost, in quotes, get away with it when you use comedy, when you use cartoons, when you use satire to get a very serious point across?
That's a tricky question to answer. I can say we've gotten away with it so far. But again, it's never guaranteed that it will remain as such, because we've had instances of activists and journalists being abducted. We have Itai Zamara, who was a very popular activist, Occupy Africa Unity Square, who was abducted early last year, and there hasn't been a word from him since.
Now.
Yeah, so it's still a space where you might find certain freedoms, but you don't know if they're cosmetic freedoms. Is it to portray a state of democracy? Because the situation on the ground doesn't necessarily portray a free society.
Okay, I guess we'll just go back to what you said initially, that you have this freedom of speech, but you're not guaranteed freedom after that.
Yeah.
All right, let me come to Agnes Nandutu from Uganda. What's it like in Uganda? Because Uganda also, from the impression others may have of Uganda, is a place where media space is restricted by the regime.
Yes, as he said, in the books, there is freedom of the press. That is the books. But practically, it is difficult to talk about a big politician negatively and you go away about with it. For example, I can give you an example. We have an activist called Stella Nyanza, as we speak. He's now in prison for expressing her freedom, talking about the leadership, the wrongs in the leadership. And we had a journalist, a senior journalist at NTV also, kidnapped for a night and then appeared. And up to now, the investigation is still going on simply because she was trying to support the activists of what she's talking about. So it is good as a journalist. I'm happy that we can continue to celebrate the world press freedom. But actually, in most of African countries, there is no media freedom. You can only have freedom to talk about what the powers that be want you to talk about. But the freedom to talk about the corruption, the tribalism, and all the wrong things that are being done by the leaders that be. You have no freedom to do that. You have no security. There is no security that after writing a story, it has been published, you drive or walk peacefully home. You might be kidnapped on the way.
You remind me of not too long ago when we had Joy Doreen Bira, who's based in Kenya but Ugandan, was basically just doing what a journalist would do, taking pictures, but she was arrested and accused of several things. But we don't want to go too much into that. But what is the media in Uganda doing to have that addressed? Is there a way of seeking redress on this?
Yeah, we are struggling. We are struggling, but the parliament that would have stood with us is another parliament that is not strong enough, that is not independent enough to say, yes, the executive, this is the fourth estate, it has to be protected, to tell the public what is happening. So it's like we are loners, struggling alone to fight the draconian laws that are coming in place. You say you should have a degree, you should be licensed to do this. And if they know you are critical, they will not silence you, I'm sure, if that law is in place. For example, myself, I have a senior parliamentary reporter who was very critical. But because of my criticism, because of my independence, I was moved away from parliament in guise. And I can't report in parliament anymore. I'm not allowed there because I am a critical journalist and many others. So the freedom is in the books. It's not practical on the ground.
All right, and I guess there's a program you run currently in Uganda, and I'll come to that a bit so that you can give us a little bit about that and what you have done since now you've been moved from Parliament and how you're addressing that. But let me talk to Issam. And Issam, how is it in Jordan?
I find it very interesting how the similarities between what everyone has been saying and about the situation in Jordan and somehow in the Arab world, because to the outsider it's always just like, yeah, we have freedom of speech, you can say whatever you want, all of that. But when it comes to practice, depending on how on each country really around us, it depends. But one of the biggest problems in Jordan is that Jordan is very much controlled by the countries around it because it depends on aid from them. So it ends up that a number of cases, there are a number of journalists currently in jail for criticizing Saudi or Emirati politicians, and they would take them to jail because
simply because of
because they have enough influence over Jordan in order to do that. So the Jordanians are pretty much, it's like you can't go really high up, you're in jail instantly. Like there's no even discussing it. That is not the extent of the freedom of speech. But to an extent, you can go quite far saying things about the government and criticizing things and still get away with it. What you can't get away with it is criticizing other countries.
All right, Dadara, listening to the three of them speak, does it sound like Kenya maybe has more media freedom space? I know we still criticize our government and regime, but does it sound like we have more space?
No, I think I would concur with a lot of what they've said in the sense that on the books or what it looks like is that you've got freedom. But if you think even in Kenya's case, if you think of satirists like Gado, who got fired from the Nation for expressing his opinion. If you think of people like Dennis Galava, who's now working at the Standard, also got fired from the Nation for simply writing an editorial that was critical of Uhuru Kenyatta. So this is, I think, a worldwide problem. I think if you look across different countries, you find that there is a sense in which media freedoms are being constricted, where people's ability to discuss their issues and to critique the people who rule over them is being reduced. And I think on this day of all days, the World Press Freedom Day, is a day we should really reflect on what that means. Because journalists are just the voice of society. By shutting them down, what you're really doing is shutting down society. It's telling society there are certain things you can't talk about. And I think for satirists, for cartoonists, comedians and stuff, one of the things that they've been able to do is to find ways to circumvent these restrictions that are being put in there. And using the medium of humor, they've been able to discuss things that you wouldn't normally see, for example, on the front page of your news. If you think of the example of Kenya and going back to the days of Moi, we had cartoonists like Gado, Mado before him, people like James Kamawira, who would be saying things that essentially editorial writers couldn't write. Or they would be drawing, their drawings would express opinions that weren't allowed necessarily in the written word. And they were able, I think, utilizing that medium to speak, to express what Kenyans were thinking, what people wanted to say. In fact, one of the studies that we did in 2004 that looked at what people thought about political cartoons and the impact they had had, and we did this study in 13 towns across Kenya. They found that, we found that this, people were telling us that what Gado says is what we think but cannot say. And I think, in a sense, utilizing this medium, the satirists and cartoonists are able to express thoughts that would otherwise probably be landing you in jail. I think there's been a change from the Moi regime right now to the all the way to the Huru one, where there's been a much more focus by government on satirists, in a way that even Moi didn't do it. So he never went after Mad, he never went after Gado, in the way that we are seeing, for example, the Huru administration doing it now.
Okay, and that is all. It looks like we have a common agreement that on paper there is legislation that talks about media freedom, and that seems to be across the board. Now, why do you think that then the governments, the different governments, would put it on paper but do not allow or somehow constrict? Yet media is meant to be the voice of the people. It's meant to be the watchdog of the people. It's meant to put the politicians on check for the sake of the people, and also just highlight some of the things that are coming up. What and how do we circumvent that? But let's start with, why would the governments, do you think, have it on paper but yet do not want it out there? Let me start with you, Tongai.
I think it all comes down to control. To be able to control a people or population, it's focusing on the information that they get. In order for propaganda to work, it's to limit the options of information streams that arrive to the people. And the less informed population is, the decision-making process is easier to also guide, if it's with elections, day-to-day runnings, even molding perceptions. So I feel it's just going back to propagating the information that is necessary or required by a population that serves the government's interest. And by so enforcing, you can actually have a population that then self-regulates with that limited information. So now you self-censor and kind of become your own watchdogs to your limited what can I say, spaces of expression. So in a way, you cage yourselves. You then become, what can I say, slaves to that lack of information or lack of...
and you have to go with what the government says, the government of the day says as the truth.
It becomes the truth of the people, which is not actually factual.
It's a truth that has been spun. And I guess there are different solutions for different governments and countries. But do you think that there is much that media can do to get out of that? It seems like it's a common thing across the board.
Sorry, your question again?
Do you think there's something that media can do to ensure that do we need media martyrs, as it were? People who will stick their neck out and maybe even possibly lose their lives or be jailed for the sake of media freedom?
I think the way we've been approaching it while working for the past 4 years is we've been trying to avoid exactly that. Because I think there are smarter ways, to an extent, to deal with certain things by trying to push the line slowly. And I think that was one of the interesting things that we've experienced, that on the first day when we started the magazine about 4 years ago, we would barely mention an MP. Like, it was just like...
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your magazine so that we have a bit of a background.
Oh, so,
what do you do?
We publish an online satirical magazine covering issues from around the Middle East, from like all over the countries, and we just write a daily 2 to 3 articles covering these topics, and that's mainly it. So over the past 4 years, we just started off just very slowly, just
pushing the line.
Putting just one more, and for when we started off, it's like, oh, that's not jail material, that's fine, and then it's like, then we push the next one, it's like just a little bit further, and now I think we're in to an extent, comfortable place. Every 3 weeks, probably, we publish an article and we sit on the edge of our seats. But
and you're still on the edge.
But as they said, it's like, I think that's like one of the interesting things. Like, you don't know where your freedom ends. You will like, everything is all right until it's not, and you don't know when it will stop
until it hits you. Let me come to you, Agnes, and you have a program that you run. Tell us a little bit about your program. Yeah,
before I tell you about the program, you said, why do governments do that?
Right.
You see, just as you said, it's cosmetic. They want to show the world that there's democracy in the country. They want to show donors that there's democracy in the country, but in real terms, there's no democracy. That's why, as journalists, we should tell those donors that before you accept what these governments are telling you, go on the ground and see how many journalists have been jailed. Is that free press? How many have been silenced? How many have been sacked? They influence the companies that employ us to sack us. So is that freedom? So they should not listen to what these governments tell them that there's, look this constitution, look at this act. There's freedom, but they should look at what is happening
on the ground.
On the ground. Back at home, I do a number of things, but the reason I'm in Nairobi here to attend the Nairobi Satire Festival, I have a news item that I do on TV. It's called NTV Uganda. It's part of the news. It comes out at the end of the news just to bring a smile on the face of people who have been watching the accidents, who have been watching the politicians.
And normally news is very grim and sad.
Yes, it's sad. When a politician tells you, I'm not your servant, you get sad. Another accident happens here, you get sad. And somebody has been shot down, you say, what is happening in our country? But at the end of it all, as you wind up, there is something to bring a smile on your face. And this is a collection of clips that come from politicians, that come from Wananchi, everybody, a range of things that, you know, I do to ensure that people have, and people have it. It is watched all over the country, and people might switch off news and go to another, but when they know the time that it comes, they will come back and watch. Let's watch. And that has made me very, very popular in the country. Sometimes they think I am a small, funny girl who... But when they meet me, they can't believe that I do that kind of...
But now, Agnes, what you also do is that you get a message across by the use of lighter language, by the use of humor. And that's what we are... I want us to move on now in terms of the place for satire, especially in getting a message across. Because from what Isam has mentioned, with... for want of a better way of expressing it, when it comes to serious media, you know, where we are supposed to cross-check every fact, we're supposed to make sure we have all the documents in place before you publish so that you don't have a lawsuit, and also so that it's credible. With satire, you seem to there seems to be a way of getting away with a lot.
Yeah, somehow maybe somebody might laugh and forget something that, like if you get a clip, the president is telling Ugandans, come on, I am not your servant, I serve myself and my family. You keep that clip, you pick it, and then you interview other people, what is your view about? They will say it in a funny way. And we go for those who are really funny politicians. We have a number of funny politicians in the country. We have a number of funny activists in the country. You go and interview them, and they say it in a very, very funny, but in actual sense, they're attacking the president on what he has said, but in a very satiric way, which I think...
And do you find that maybe helps them get away with it? Whereas if it was a serious interview where you say, I am saying this against the president, they would probably be arrested immediately after that. But with satire, you know, somehow manage to maneuver.
I think for now we are maneuvering, but as we go on, they might think twice and say, how?
What's going on
millions are getting this message through satire.
I think I might contest the idea that satire is not serious. I think it is very serious, and I think it is taken very, very seriously by the people in power. The fact is, I think satire is able to use a phrase, to call bullshit in a way that mainstream media is not structured to do. So, for example, when Donald Trump says something that we all know is a lie, mainstream press will go out and try and find what's the evidence for this, you know, and have a discussion, almost as if this is something worth discussing, you know. But satirists simply won't go around it. They'll say, well, actually, he is lying. This is bullshit. You shouldn't listen to it.
Use that word in there, but
but my point is, satirists are able to be honest in a way that mainstream press isn't, you know. And to go back to your initial question about why governments clamp down on it, if you look at the history of oppressive regimes, you find one of the first things they always do is clamp down on press. You know, so you don't have a free press in any totalitarian regime. And the reason they do that is because they understand that their legitimacy comes from their acceptance by the people that they are in power. You know, that if the people say that, well, we are no longer going to tolerate this ATC, then their rule or the basis of their rule becomes very fragile. And I think in that sense, freedom only exists at the places in which it is restricted, so that it only exists at the margins. And that's why what satirists keep doing is pushing those margins. And by pushing them, they keep freeing the rest of society to say things that they otherwise wouldn't have been saying. And if you go through, even if you're looking at history, you'd look at people like Mark Twain, you'd look at people like, what's his name, the guy who wrote 1984.
Orwell.
Yeah, like Orwell. All these were satirists, and they used the medium of satire to be able to say things that at the time the sort of mainstream press wasn't expressing. If you read Animal Farm, you know, that is something that is true for all ages, you know, but it's a fantastic piece of satire. You know, because it takes society and reduces it, you know, to a bunch of animals. You know,
just like you have said, it's not a right word to use on air. There are these satiric things that drive a very, very important and strong point to the population. But you find it's difficult. It's not worth going in a news story. They always say that. That's why I came out with, my program is called Point Blank. Blank to the point. You say the truth, nothing but the truth.
It's bare-knuckle truth.
Yeah.
Just tell it as it
is.
If it's
bullshit, it's bullshit. So you cannot put bullshit in a news story. So we find this, he has driven a point home. You have called your some people swine. So it's swine. In
you
satire,
don't sugarcoat it.
Yeah, in satire it's this, and the point will be driven home. But if it was not that kind of satire, then you would have lost this message that would have helped the population.
Okay. Isam, is it the same in Jordan where you find satire is allowed to get away with possibly something that you would not get away with usually? I mean, just like the word they've used, you have to even try to stop them, but they're still using it. But if it was a satirical, for instance, a stand-up comedian who stands up, they're allowed to say that without, batting an eyelid, whereas you could not say that in, for instance, a conference.
Oh, no, absolutely not. I think what we said and what other satirists have said in Jordan would have been instantly in jail for the points that they were making. It's just a little bit covered up, and it's a little bit coated with other things, like we'll give it, like in our case, we give it a fictional narrative, basically, like the casing of a fictional thing, and then you give it to the people, and then it becomes, it's not a direct hit. And I think the politician's skin is too thin to take a direct hit. And it's like, if you just make it nicer for them or something, and it's like, and then it doesn't feel like you're just attacking them personally. It just, it makes it lighter for them. And I think it is, again, just because of their weakness at the end of the day, that they can't take it. And the other thing is that because they know that what they're doing is, like, especially when they do their mistakes, their ever so coming mistakes all the time, there are way too many and there are too obvious. And it's like, if you just hit that on them, it's like you hit their dignity almost. And that's, and because, like, and the dumber they are, the more the more sensitive they're going to be. But they don't want to take that responsibility.
The more they're bait for satirists, because I mean, if you look at somebody like Donald Trump, the mainstream media, if I can call it that, because satirists would still be part of mainstream media, but let's use that word for argument's sake. Mainstream media somehow doesn't know how to handle Donald Trump. Because, first of all, he is completely unfriendly. He says some of the most ridiculous things, unexpected. But you'll find that is literally fodder for satirists. That's where they'll find most of their material from. I don't know how it is in Zimbabwe, but we'll come to the likes of Donald Trump in just a bit. But how is it in Zimbabwe in terms of satire? Can satire not really sugarcoat, but say very serious things in a humorous manner that is able to get the message across?
I think it's been one of the most effective tools, because I think our main challenge now, I think it's more of a global challenge, is human beings' attention span. With this being such a saturated information age, like people are just constantly tweeting.
There's so much information all over.
Yeah, what's the shortest, quickest way I can get informed and move on? So I think with satire, it also allows for that engagement to last longer. I think the only drawback with satire as well is when people focus more on the humor and not necessarily the message. So it's always trying to navigate and balance out how much of the information is going out with the humor. And so the humor is, I think, the tip of the arrow. But the actual rod itself is the message that you want.
That they're getting across.
Yeah.
And are satirists in Zimbabwe able to get to edge further than you would on an editorial writing?
Definitely, definitely. We hide in plain sight behind the creativity. Sometimes it's a matter of realizing that it's not worth it naming actual names, but describing situations and individuals in a way that the message still comes across, but it's not a direct personal attack. Everyone knows it's an unspoken truth.
You know who is being talked about and what the message is.
Yes, but no names have been said. So if it's, I mean, if you want to take me to court, I'm like, well, is this an admission?
Are you admitting that this is you?
Are you fitting this shoe, sir? Yeah. And then there are other individuals like your Donald Trumps where I feel like satire, if you're to satirize individuals like that, it should be with a disclaimer that it's based on a true story. some instances where...
I think Donald Trump has actually made it a bit harder for satirists and cartoonists,
really?
because pretty much what he says is satire. In fact, Trevor Noah said this is a stand-up comedian by himself. and it is hard to make fun of a guy whenever he speaks, he says the most sort of ridiculous things. So, and actually, when you think of how satire works, it's really taking something that is serious and making it ridiculous.
Yeah.
So if the politician is actually doing this for you, you find that you're kind of out of a job. But I say one thing that, and shouldn't just concentrate on Donald Trump and forget.
Is it the reason he was voted overwhelmingly because of his...
perhaps. but
being a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things we shouldn't forget is we've got Donald Trumps in all our societies. In Kenya, you think of people like Mike Sonko, people like Waititu. These are your local versions of Donald Trump. And they do and they say the most ridiculous things. And I think the role for us as satirists is to actually bring society to a point where we can recognize ridiculousness, where we can understand this is not how things should be, and point it out in a way that, again, to use the phrase mainstream press, doesn't do it, because it tends to treat everything it is given as if it is serious, as if it is important. But satirists are in a space where they can actually say, no, this is not how it should be. You shouldn't listen to that guy.
Satirists are able to create a sense of media. I think media literacy is one of the biggest problems that are in probably the world now. Like, it used to be, like 5 years ago, I would have thought, like, it's a developing world problem. Now it's just spread into everywhere with Brexit and with Trump and all of that. So I think satire is able to really, like, you name things by what they're called, by not calling them by what they're called. It's, but like it's able to do a lot of that, and I think as Trump and such politicians are stepping into the territory of the satire. I think, on the other hand, also the media should step into the territory of satire in a way. It's like on the other way. So for a real news program to be able to say, it's like, yeah, he said that today, and move on. It's like no one's obviously going to listen to that and literally brush it off the way it should be by a serious news presenter. And I think that overlap is necessary at this point.
Okay, and do you think maybe satire is the way to go in the sense that mainstream media is guilty and almost bound to a box that everything has to be so serious? I mean, even when you're anchoring news, there's a certain way you must look. There's a certain, as though you're not human.
Serious.
Yeah, such that if you smile too much or you joke too much, everybody will think, wait, this cannot be serious news. And as a result, we end up now putting ourselves in a box where when things are ridiculous, like Adara is saying, then we still handle them in a serious manner, whereas we should be dismissing them and saying, look, this is absolutely ridiculous. It should not even be considered.
Definitely. I can actually add on to that. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but I think,
so is satire the way to go?
Yeah, but I think...
No, but not necessarily. Like what we were talking about, it's like you don't have to break the seriousness as a presenter in order to say, you don't have to laugh at what he said. You can just simply, it's like and today he said this, and it's like, obviously no one's going to listen, move on. Like, it's like, and you can say it with deadpan seriousness. You don't have to break that character. You just have to break the format of being able to say things without being overly politically correct, if we're going for that term. So just say it as it should be.
And I also think that, again, I go back to the point that satire is serious business. It's just utilizing humor, but it does deal with serious issues. And I think the lesson for mainstream press is you can't discuss serious issues sort of in a human fashion, where you can say, when a politician is lying, instead of treating it as if it is a quote-unquote alternative fact that is worth investigating, so to call it what it is. And actually, if you look at the genesis of satirists, when you look at what they used to call court jesters, for example, in Europe, these were the people who were actually allowed to tell the truth to the king. You know, as he sat there, they could tell him, you know, when he did something ridiculous, this is what you're doing, you know. And that is the power of the format, you know. And I think for mainstream press, what they learn is you can actually speak truth to power. This thing that media pretends to do, but in the end ends up sort of kowtowing to power, sort of essentially just massaging egos of politicians, you know. That actually, if they did their job, they would do what the satirists do, which is essentially tell them, when they go wrong, this is exactly what you're doing, not sugarcoat it, not change it. You know, all we have is a difference. I mean, the example I would give, or the analogy I would give, is of a pill. You know, you can have a sugar coating on a pill that makes it more palatable. You know, that is what the humor is.
But it still gets the job
pill
done.
itself, yeah, exactly. It's the medicine in the pill is what's important. You know, and it's what as Tongai said, it's not so much the humor that's important; it's a message that is contained.
Tongai, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I think the way I look at satire and maybe the more mainstream approach is news and information with the emotion, the human emotion taken out of it. It's like having a very objective, like distanced approach to the information that you're giving out. Where satire, it's more trying to appeal with the individual to actually connect with the story. If it's going to incite you to be happier or analyze it critically or angry or actually just switch off the news. But it wants to spark an emotion in the end recipient. And I think mainstream is more just a matter of this is the information, this is the facts.
It's almost a very mechanical telling of the news, as if it's just a series of facts, you know, at least as mainstream media tends to deal with the news. And I think satirists go beyond that to try and explain, well, actually, this is what it actually means, you know, to you as a person. I think people are easier, they're able to connect, for example, with Gado, or if you're in the US, people like Trevor Noah, you know, because they're able to express that which is unsaid in the mainstream press.
Right.
And in Kenya's example, if you look at our history, we've always had these people. And if you think about people like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, all of these guys who started off doing plays that were sort of satire within that space and got clamped down by a government. The idea was that they could tell the truth in a way that this mechanical telling that we've got to be, I mean, how do you become objective about a lie?
You can't.
It really can't
For
be.
example, satire is a very important tool of driving the message to the population. If you come on TV and say that this Kenyan government is so corrupt that it has made you, Kenyans live on $1, they are so poor, they have no water, they have no health services, but you put it in a cartoon where Uhuru Kenyatta has a big stomach falling down, and then a Kenyan squatting with a plate, begging. You see
Probably
how strong
just
that
bones.
message is when somebody looks at it? And back in Uganda, politicians are now going satiric to achieve a number of things. We have a number of members of parliament who just campaign in a very satiric way, and they are voted to parliament. We have an East African Yala MP who was voted, having copied a word from a Nigerian comedian, I would note Koto in their puhu. He was voted
That
by...
became his tag.
Yes, and that was it. The President Yoweri Museveni just came up with a rap. Do you want another rap? It was
Yes,
satire, and yes, everybody followed it. So this satire shouldn't be taken for granted. And some of us who do satire should not also be taken for granted because we are doing very, very serious journalism. Yeah.
All right, and maybe moving on now to the space where satire sometimes, and I don't know how it is in your countries, basically, I'm not sure whether there's training for it or it's something that just comes natural.
I think it is natural. It's natural. I did not go to school to make people laugh or to do satire. I think it is the DNA in somebody. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, well, it's hard to frame it because we grew up with satirists not actually knowing that we were growing up under the influence of a generation of satirists ahead of us. Like when we talk about theater in the park, where you'd watch a play and you're like, oh, it's very informative and it's funny as hell, but I can relate to it. But not actually having that tag of satire attached to it at the time. And now we see that there's also a new generation that we kind of engage with. This is back home in Zimbabwe. If it's just little mentorship in terms of like, okay, how do I get my content out there? Well, there's social media. In spaces where you find that physical spaces are clamped down, there is social media, taking clips, random clips, uploading them, and then distributing. That's how you start. That's how you build your audience. So in that way, there is sort of a mentorship, but a person has to already be
It has to almost be a natural, because I think comedians are naturally that way. They just think in a certain way, and of course you're one of them, so we'll be watching that. But yeah.
One of the things I would say, I think the best satirists in the world are children, and I think the reason for that is at the basis of satire is honesty. It's simply calling things as they actually are. You know, and if you're with your kids at home and you do something stupid, then your child will tell you, well, yeah, that's BS, you know. And that is, I think, what satire is and what it does. It actually speaks the truth, you know, to the king. It actually speaks truth to power. And I think everybody, in that sense, is born a satirist, in the sense that everybody is born honest. Everybody has a capacity to be honest. It's just that as we grow up, we learn to sort of shy away from power, to sort of give it its space, and we don't want to get into trouble.
We want to be politically correct.
And stuff. So we are taught to moderate our language. We are taught to moderate our opinions. And I think what satirists do, or what they struggle against, is that moderation. Is to actually learn to say the truth as you actually see.
All right, we need to wind up because of time. Isam, let me come to you, and maybe just very briefly the role of cartoons, because we've talked about satire, and cartoons definitely play a very big role in that whole conversation.
Yeah, I think, as you said, because it's you'll get the message so much more quicker than text, than a video, than anything. You just look at it, you read one sentence, and you're just there. You understand the situation. And a good caricaturist, and we have one, we have like the famous one of Jordan. We have a number of others, obviously, and each of them is really able to get a really strong thing across. What I wanted to say is, like, because we're talking about elections, and I thought that might be noteworthy, is that when that happened, the thing that we did about it was that we created a full campaign, a full elections campaign. We don't elect our president, but we elect our MPs, which have no power at the end of the day, but we do. But when we do that, it's like, what we did was we created a full campaign as if these were real candidates. We photoshopped candidates, and we put them, we tried to put them in the streets, but then the government threatened that they'd put us all in jail. So we didn't do that. So what we did was Photoshop them into photos of the city, as if they're banners hanging all around the city, basically, and like using their mock slogans and like making fun of like the way they're approaching things, so that they're called for what they are also.
If I may very quickly about the Nairobi Satire Festival, because I know we're going.
Yes, that music means it's time.
We're having a series of events. Today in the evening, we're going to be launching the International Cartoon Exhibition at the Alliance Francaise. Tomorrow there's a comedy night on Thursday. This is all open to the public if they want to come and listen. Tongai will be performing alongside a bunch of other guys. And we've got a public lecture on the link between satire and politics on Friday afternoon. So it's all open to the public. If they want to come, we're going to be at Alliance Francaise. They're all welcome.
Thank you very much, Patrick Gadara, who is a cartoonist and also a media consultant. Thank you. We also have Isam Urikat from Jordan. Thank you for joining us. Agnes Nandutu from Uganda, and Tongai Makara from Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for being part of the panel this morning on Newsroom. That's where we wind up Newsroom this morning, and thank you for staying with us. Do stay with us, though, on KTN News. We've got more news updates coming up. For those of us on KTN Home, Life and Style begins now, so we'll say goodbye. But do stay with us. We've got a lot lined up for you before the end of the show.